If a man is not missing you, the solution is not to do more. It's often to be less. But that less is not emptiness. It is intentional silence. It is still presence. It is the kind of energy that enters his mind, not because you pushed, but because you withdrew with wisdom. Most people believe you make someone miss you by staying active in their life through texts, reminders, social media. But what if the real magnetism is in the void? Not in your loudness, but in your peaceful absence. Not in chasing his attention, but in cultivating your own self-attention. This is not a technique, it is a transformation. Because when a woman learns to hold her energy, instead of scattering it, she becomes unforgettable. Not because she begged to be remembered, but because she became impossible to forget. Welcome to Self-Mastery, your space for real wisdom and inner growth. Subscribe and remember name of our YouTube channel, Self-Mastery, because others may copy the voice, but the truth lives here. There is something profoundly misunderstood in the modern search for love and connection. Many believe that to be remembered, they must stay present, that if they retreat, they will be replaced. And so, in fear of being forgotten, they overextend, reaching out, proving, posting, pleasing. But the truth is far simpler, and yet far more powerful. The deepest emotional impact is made not in noise, but in silence. Not in presence, but in absence. Not in overexposure, but in selective detachment. When a man begins to miss a woman, it does not happen in the moments when she is talking endlessly, giving constantly, or standing visibly in his shadow. It happens in the stillness of her distance, in the absence of her voice, her scent, her laugh echoing down the hallway. It happens when the rhythm of life continues, but she is no longer part of it, and the space she once occupied now stands still, quiet, yet filled with her memory. This phenomenon is not magic. It is psychological. It is biological. It is spiritual. The brain craves what is not immediately available. Dopamine, the chemical of anticipation, is more active when we are chasing something than when we finally get it. This is why surprises feel more exhilarating than predictable gestures. It is why scarcity, not desperation, creates emotional gravity. Imagine a simple scenario. A man comes home every evening and his partner greets him with the same routine, smiling, offering dinner, asking about his day. At first, he feels warmth, gratitude. But over time, that same routine becomes invisible. Not because it is wrong, but because it is predictable. The brain filters out what is consistent. The mind forgets to value what seems guaranteed. Now imagine, one day, she is not there. The silence at the door replaces the greeting. The space at the dinner table is empty. Her absence is no longer a theory. It is felt. The air becomes heavier, not because she raised her voice, but because she is no longer contributing her quiet presence. This is when longing begins, not from rejection, but from reflection. The energy of absence speaks a language louder than words. When you pull back not to manipulate, but to restore your center, something miraculous begins to unfold. The man who once looked past you now begins to look for you. But this only happens when your absence is filled with grace, not resentment, with stillness, not games, with purpose, not punishment. The modern world, saturated with instant messaging, social media posts, and constant accessibility, makes it harder for longing to survive. Attention spans are short and gratification is immediate. But the heart doesn't evolve at the same speed as technology. Emotional bonds are still forged the old-fashioned way, through depth, through presence, and most surprisingly, through mindful distance. One of the most common mistakes is the belief that consistency in availability equals security in love. But the paradox is this: availability diminishes perceived value. Just as a rare gem is treasured more than a common stone, a woman's energy, when offered with discernment, is far more powerful than when it is offered without boundaries. There was a woman who always answered his calls within seconds, always rearranged her life to make space for his needs, always gave even when her own cup was empty, and he loved her in the beginning, but slowly, unknowingly, he began to expect her instead of appreciate her. And the tragedy of love is not in being unloved, it is in being unappreciated. When she finally stepped back, not in anger, but in quiet self-respect, he began to feel a strange sensation, emptiness, confusion, then longing, because her absence forced him to confront what her presence had made too convenient to notice. She was the stabilizing force in his life. She had been the mirror he used to understand himself, but now that mirror was no longer available on command. There is a saying, you never know what you have until it's gone. But that is not always accurate. Sometimes you do know what you have. You just fail to realize how rare it is until you're left with only the echo. This is why absence is powerful. It creates a vacuum that reflection rushes into. But this absence must be intentional, not reactive, not vengeful. It must come from a place of self-mastery, not self-pity. Only then does it carry the right energy. Only then does it plant seeds of remembrance instead of bitterness. When you hold your energy with dignity, you stop needing to ask, does he miss me? You begin to understand that being missed is not a goal. It's a natural consequence of offering something of depth and then stepping away without resistance. The emptiness you leave behind will be filled either with regret or reverence, and that depends on how you offered yourself in the first place. And yet there is a deeper layer to this. It is not only about being missed because you are gone. It is about being missed because of how you made him feel when you were near. This is where emotional imprint enters. Every interaction you have with another person leaves behind an emotional fingerprint. You are not remembered by your appearance alone. You are remembered by how you influenced the nervous system of another human being. In neuroscience, it is understood that emotion has a stronger impact on memory than logic. The limbic system, the part of the brain responsible for emotional life, does not process language the way the neocortex does. It processes feeling. And that feeling becomes associated with your presence. So if your presence brings chaos, even if you are physically beautiful or intellectually sharp, the subconscious will resist closeness. But if your presence brings calm, clarity, and a subtle invitation to return to one's best self, then your absence becomes a haunting melody in his mind, playing over and over again when you are no longer around. Consider these two women walk into a man's life. One stimulates his senses with passion, attention, and drama. The other speaks less, listens more, and her silence feels like a space to breathe. When both women are gone, the first is remembered for the adrenaline, the roller coaster, but the second is remembered for something deeper, peace. And long after the fire of passion fades, the yearning for peace remains. This is why being missed is not about what you did, but about what you activated in him. A story may illustrate this well. A man once fell in love with a woman who didn't say much. She wasn't trying to impress him. She didn't change herself to fit his mold. She simply was who she was. Kind, steady, still. When she laughed, it was soft and slow. When she listened, she made eye contact, but never clung to his words. When she left, she didn't ask for promises or chase him down for closure. She just walked away gently. Years later, after other relationships and more excitement, he found himself thinking about her. Not because she was the loudest, but because she was the quietest. Her energy left a mark that time could not erase. Her emotional fingerprint was so precise, so unique, that no one else could match it. And in his moments of solitude, it was her memory that returned. What made her unforgettable? She knew how to be fully present, and then fully gone, with no loose threads, no desperate attachments. Her presence was a sanctuary, and her absence was a test. Most people focus on what to say, what to do, how to appear, but very few focus on what it feels like to be around them. That is the key to emotional imprinting. It is not about learning to perform. It is about learning to regulate your own emotional state so that others feel safe in your presence. The woman who triggers a man's best emotional state, confidence, peace, inspiration, becomes addictive. Not because she manipulates, but because she activates a higher frequency in him. And when she is gone, that frequency vanishes too. He doesn't just miss her, he misses himself when he was with her. That is the ultimate power. And yet, this cannot be faked. It cannot be rehearsed. You cannot pretend to be grounded when you are not. You cannot pretend to be peaceful when your mind is racing with anxiety. This kind of influence only comes when a woman has done the work on herself. When she has faced her own shadows, when she has mastered her own emotional landscape, it begins in how she wakes up, how she breathes, how she speaks to herself in moments of silence. It is the way she walks into a room without needing approval, the way she holds her boundaries without explanation, the way she says no, not as rejection, but as self-respect. When a woman lives in alignment with her own truth, her energy becomes medicine. And when she leaves, even if the man doesn't understand why, his body will. His nervous system will feel the absence of balance. His heart will miss the silent wisdom that she carried. His mind will return to moments that didn't seem significant at the time, but now shimmer with hidden meaning. The soft smile she gave while looking out the window, the way she closed her eyes when listening to music, the warmth of her hand without needing to hold his. These moments were not loud, but they were anchored in presence. And presence, once experienced, is unforgettable. This is the invitation: to stop trying to make someone miss you through performance. Instead, live in such a way that your presence is deeply felt and your absence is deeply noticed. When you embody that level of emotional awareness and self-regulation, you do not need to prove anything. You do not need to chase. You do not need to wonder if you are enough, because the answer is already evident in the stillness you leave behind, in the peace you brought to his chaos, in the memory of what he once had and what he now realizes is not easily found again, in a world where external validation is often mistaken for love. Many women carry the heavy burden of proving their worth to be chosen, loved, or remembered. They show up in relationships with their hearts wide open, hoping that love will recognize effort, loyalty, and emotional labor. Yet, time and time again, they encounter a paradox that seems to defy logic. The more they give, the less they are valued. The more they stay, the more invisible they become. And the harder they try to be understood, the more they are misunderstood. But the problem is not in the giving. It is in the energy from which the giving comes. When a woman gives from emptiness, fear, or a need to be validated, her presence becomes heavy. Her love, no matter how sincere, begins to carry the weight of dependency. And no one, no matter how emotionally available, can thrive under that kind of pressure for long. To be missed, genuinely missed, by a man, a woman must learn a powerful inner discipline, the ability to remain calm, not chaotic. It sounds simple, but this calmness is not a personality trait. It is a spiritual practice. It is not about suppressing emotion, but about anchoring it. It is not about being unbothered, but about becoming unshakable. Emotional chaos may feel justified when love feels uncertain. When he becomes distant or cold, the mind races with stories. Why is he pulling away? Did I do something wrong? Is he losing interest? And then, often without realizing it, the woman begins to act from fear. She texts more, over-explains herself, becomes hyper aware of his responses, and starts to perform instead of connect. But all of these reactions, while understandable, send a powerful message beneath the surface. I am not centered in myself. In psychology, this is referred to as emotional dysregulation. When the nervous system becomes overwhelmed, it activates defense mechanisms: clinginess, withdrawal, anger, or desperation. The body becomes a battlefield of unmet needs and suppressed wounds, and this energy, though rarely spoken aloud, is always felt. People don't fall in love only with looks or words. They fall in love with how they feel in your presence. If being around you consistently brings anxiety, confusion, or emotional turbulence, they begin to associate you with the discomfort they are trying to escape. It is not that you are not lovable. It is that the energy you carry is not yet safe for yourself or for others. A woman who learns to self-regulate becomes a sanctuary, not just for others, but first for herself. She does not react immediately to a delayed text. She does not spiral when plans change. She does not demand reassurance every time she feels insecure. Instead, she turns inward. She breathes deeply. She allows herself to feel, and then she watches those feelings like clouds passing through the sky, temporary, shifting, not who she is. She understands that the root of emotional chaos is not the man. It is the attachment to the outcome. It is the fear of being abandoned, the fear of not being chosen, the fear of being too much or not enough. These fears, if unexamined, will sabotage even the most sincere connection. But once brought into the light of awareness, they begin to lose their grip. There was a woman once who loved deeply, but she had never known emotional safety growing up. Love for her had always been conditional, something she had to earn, negotiate, or sacrifice for. So when she met a man who was calm and consistent, she didn't know what to do with it. She started to overthink, to question, to test, and eventually her own anxiety began to erode the foundation of the relationship. It wasn't until she began a practice of daily stillness, 10 minutes each morning sitting with her breath, her thoughts, her sensations, that something shifted. She began to notice the difference between what was real and what was her fear speaking. She stopped responding immediately to every emotional wave. She began to observe, and slowly the chaos inside her started to soften. This woman didn't become emotionless. She became emotionally intelligent. And that shift changed everything, not only in her romantic relationship, but in how she carried herself in every space she entered. She no longer needed to be loud to be heard. Her calm presence spoke louder than her words ever could. The irony is that this kind of calmness is often mistaken for distance, especially by those who are used to chaos being a form of connection. But true intimacy does not come from intensity. It comes from presence, from being able to sit in silence with someone and not feel the urge to fill the space, from being able to disagree without destroying the bond, from knowing that you can hold your center even when everything outside you feels uncertain. And this is where the real power begins to emerge. When a woman becomes a source of peace, a man will find himself drawn to her not out of lust or novelty, but because his soul remembers how it felt to be in her presence. He may not articulate it in words, but his nervous system will respond. He will begin to realize that she is not like the others, not because she is trying to be different, but because she is different. And the difference lies not in what she wears or says, but in what she no longer needs to prove. A woman who respects herself does not fear walking away when her peace is threatened. She does not chase love. She embodies it. She knows that her energy is her responsibility, and she carries it with intentionality. She understands that mystery is not manipulation. It is the natural byproduct of self-containment. She gives, but not to earn worth. She gives because she is already full. In this world, People are drawn to what they cannot easily possess. But this is not about playing games or becoming inaccessible. It is about reclaiming your own attention before you give it to someone else. When a woman begins to honor her time, energy, and emotional boundaries, she creates a powerful shift in the relational dynamic. She no longer responds out of habit, but out of clarity. She does not abandon herself to keep someone else comfortable. She shows up fully, but only when it aligns with her values and vision. This kind of self-respect radiates. It sends a silent but undeniable signal: I am here by choice, not by desperation. Men are intuitive in ways society rarely acknowledges. They may not speak the language of emotional awareness fluently, but they feel it. When a woman does not cling, when she does not complain unnecessarily, when she does not collapse at the first sign of distance, he begins to look at her differently. Not because she plays hard to get, but because she is hard to forget. There is a reason the most unforgettable women in a man's life are not the ones who are always available. They are the ones who had a life before him, during him, and after him. The ones who did not revolve around his attention, but instead stood rooted in their own path. One woman in particular comes to mind. She was not traditionally beautiful by society's standards, but when she walked into a room, everything shifted. Her eyes didn't dart around for approval. Her posture was relaxed, yet powerful. When she spoke, she chose her words carefully. She didn't overshare. She didn't gossip. She didn't apologize for taking up space. And when she smiled, it was not to charm. It was because she had found joy in herself. She had mastered the art of being fully present with others, while still belonging to herself. And every man she encountered felt the same thing. There was something about her he couldn't quite define, but it lingered, even when she was gone. This is not the result of external beauty or clever tactics. This is the result of deep inner work, of having spent enough time in solitude to no longer fear it, of having faced rejection and learned not to take it as a verdict, of having discovered that her worth does not rise or fall with someone else's recognition. And when she loved fully, but without abandoning herself. She didn't shrink, she didn't chase. She didn't need to explain why she was enough. She simply knew. This is what creates curiosity. A woman who respects herself doesn't need to be loud about it. Her decisions speak for her. Her boundaries communicate what she allows. And her absence becomes a question mark in the minds of those who once took her for granted. There is no force more magnetic than a woman who has reclaimed her energy, not in anger, but in awareness, not in bitterness, but in boundaries, not to provoke jealousy, but to protect joy. She no longer gives all of herself in the beginning because she understands the value of pacing. She no longer begs for love because she embodies it. She no longer compromises her standards to be chosen because she chooses herself first, and from that place invites others to meet her where she stands. And what happens when a man meets such a woman? He either rises to meet her in that space of mutual respect, or he fades into the background of her unfolding life. But either way, she remains intact. She remains sovereign. She remains in tune with her center. And so, she is missed. Not because she disappeared, but because her presence left an imprint that cannot be replicated. Because the peace she brought was real. Because the version of himself that he accessed when he was with us is now out of reach. And the world, no matter how stimulating, suddenly feels a little louder, a little emptier, without her stillness. This is not a fantasy. It is a discipline. It is a path. It is a remembering of who you were before the world convinced you to earn what should have been received freely. And when you return to that essence, when you stop waiting to be chosen and instead choose to fully be yourself, you become the kind of woman who is not only missed when she's gone, but valued while she's still here. There is a moment in every relationship where words lose their power, where explanations, no matter how eloquent, fall short, where the desire to be understood collides with the other person's unwillingness or inability to listen deeply. In that moment, you are faced with a quiet choice: continue to argue your worth, or become it so fully that even your silence carries clarity. Many women, when faced with emotional confusion or distance in a relationship, are taught to speak more, express more, clarify more. They are told that communication is the path to closeness. And yes, clear communication is a vital part of healthy connection. But what is often forgotten is this: the most powerful communication is not always verbal. It is energetic. It is behavioral. It is revealed in how you carry yourself, not how loudly you try to explain who you are. When a man begins to drift, whether emotionally or mentally, the instinct for many women is to follow him with their words, to make him see, to make him hear, to make him understand the weight of what he is risking. But a truth seldom spoken is that explanation without transformation is noise. And the more you try to convince someone to value you, the more you distance yourself from your own worth. There is a saying in Eastern philosophy: a flower does not explain its beauty. It simply blooms, and those with eyes will see. A woman who has entered a season of self-mastery does not argue with someone who underestimates her. She upgrades her life quietly. She withdraws her energy not as a punishment, but as a reflection of who she has become. And when she walks away, she leaves behind not just a memory, but a standard. To be the lesson a man learns from, you must understand the depth of your influence. Not when you are loud, but when you are still. Not when you are emotional, but when you are composed. There is an invisible power in a woman who no longer needs to explain herself because her growth has made explanation irrelevant. Consider the woman who kept telling her partner that she needed more presence from him. She repeated the same concerns. You don't listen to me. You're distracted when we're together. You say you love me, but I don't feel connected to you. He nodded, made promises, changed for a day or two, and then returned to old patterns. She felt like she was shouting into a void. And one day, she stopped, not out of resentment, but out of realization. She booked a solo retreat to the mountains. She started waking early for long walks alone. She deleted the conversations where she had begged for love. She replaced them with journaling, with stillness, with presence. Not his, but her own. And slowly, her energy shifted. When she returned, she didn't bring ultimatums or lectures. She brought silence. She brought inner alignment. And in that silence, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: absence. Not physical absence, emotional absence. The emotional availability she had always given so easily was no longer on the table. This absence spoke louder than any confrontation ever could. Her detachment was not cruel. It was composed. It was clear. She had stopped trying to change him. And in that moment, the relationship changed. Men may not always listen to words, but they listen to energy. And when a woman's energy becomes unavailable, not out of bitterness, but because it has matured, there is no mistaking the message: I am no longer where you left me. It is easy to write messages. It is harder to become the message. But this is where transformation happens. You do not tell someone that you are evolving. You evolve. You do not plead for them to appreciate your value. You live in such a way that your value is unmistakable. And if they cannot see it, you do not beg. You bow out. This is not an act of ego. It is an act of integrity. There is nothing arrogant about knowing your worth. There is nothing disrespectful about walking away from confusion. There is nothing manipulative about silence that is born from self-respect. There is a quiet, deeply feminine strength in becoming the kind of woman whose growth makes it impossible for others to approach her the same way again. The version of you that tolerated neglect no longer exists. The version of you that explained your boundaries over and over has evolved. And now, when people return, they must confront the truth. They are no longer entitled to access the parts of you they once mishandled. This kind of shift cannot be faked. You cannot pretend to have changed and expect others to feel it. You must live the change. You must inhabit it fully. Your actions must become the boundary. Your absence must become the mirror. Your growth must become the language you speak, even when your lips are closed. There was once a man who left a woman thinking she would wait. He believed she would always be there, ready to resume what they had. But during the time apart, she didn't just wait, she transformed. She began studying psychology, took up yoga, created a life filled with purpose and ritual. When he came back, ready to pick up where they left off, he found her radiant, rooted, and unbothered. She greeted him with kindness, but not attachment, with grace, but not invitation. He felt it immediately, not in what she said, but in what she didn't need to say. The way she looked at him, not with resentment, but with closure. The way she smiled, not with hope, but with completeness. In her presence, he felt something unfamiliar: accountability. He realized that he had lost access, not just to her time, but to the version of himself that was allowed in her old world. And that was the lesson. Sometimes, the most powerful way to teach someone how to love you better is not through correction, but through elevation. You rise so far above your past patterns that the old dynamics can no longer survive in your atmosphere. You become so centered, so aligned, that anything less than respect simply cannot enter your space. But this requires courage. It requires you to release the need to be understood. It requires you to sit with the discomfort of being misinterpreted. It requires you to prioritize your growth over your attachment. And it requires you to trust that the right people will rise to meet you at your new level. Not because you demanded it, but because you became it. Transformation is not always dramatic. Often it is quiet. It happens when you stop responding to chaos, when you start valuing solitude, when you make peace with being misunderstood, when you realize that trying to force someone to love you is the quickest way to lose yourself. And losing yourself is too high a price to pay for temporary affection. You don't need to raise your voice to be heard. You don't need to prove your value to someone who cannot see it. You don't need to repeat yourself to someone who chooses not to understand. Instead, you grow, and in your growth, you create distance, not always physically, but energetically. That distance becomes the echo. That echo becomes the realization, and that realization becomes the turning point. Real influence is not control, it is presence. When you no longer chase, your energy becomes magnetic. When you no longer seek validation, your spirit becomes undeniable. When you live in integrity with yourself, you attract only those who are willing to meet you in truth. A woman who lives this way is rare, and anything rare is either deeply treasured or deeply feared. But either way, it is never forgotten. You do not need to remind someone of what they had. You become someone they no longer know how to approach casually. You stop explaining your boundaries and start embodying them. You stop asking to be treated with respect and start walking only in spaces where respect is the default. And if someone cannot meet you there, you let them go. Not because you stopped caring, but because you started caring about yourself more. Your evolution becomes the message. Your presence becomes the mirror. Your energy becomes the proof. And the lesson they learn from you is not written in your tears or your words or your explanations. It is carved into the space where you once stood. The truth is, love is not about convincing. It is about resonance. You cannot resonate with someone who is not willing to rise. And you cannot elevate if you are constantly dragging your energy down to be accessible to others. There is nothing more attractive, more unforgettable than a woman who has mastered herself. Not through perfection, but through practice. Through rituals of self-connection. Through discipline in her emotions. Through sacred silence in the places where she once screamed. She becomes the kind of woman who makes others pause. Not because she demands attention, but because her presence commands respect. She becomes the kind of woman whose absence awakens realization, and that realization becomes the very thing and that changes how others show up, not just for her, but for themselves. And the most beautiful part is this: she never needed to say a word. In the quiet spaces between two people, there lies a profound truth that many often overlook. It is not always the constant presence of another that deepens love. Rather, it is the space they leave behind, the echo of their absence, that causes one's heart to stir, to wonder, and to long. To be missed is not about how closely you stand to someone. It's about the weight of your silence when you are no longer near. It's about the energy that lingers long after you've walked out of the room. Many people, especially in love, have been conditioned to chase. To keep the connection alive, they overextend, texting too often, explaining their worth, overgiving, trying to remind someone why they should be remembered. Yet, ironically, the more you chase, the more you disappear. The more effort you spend running after someone, the less they feel the loss of you. The paradox is simple: what is too available loses its perceived value. Absence is not neglect. It is not withdrawal born of ego or manipulation. Rather, it is a conscious retreat into one's own center, into one's purpose, peace, and self-fulfillment. It is a sacred silence that invites the other to feel, to remember, to recognize what your presence truly offered. Absence is a mirror. It reflects back to the other what they had when you were there and what they may have taken for granted. Consider the story of a woman who loved deeply, but too loudly. Every day she sent messages, called repeatedly, and made sure he never had a moment to forget her. She believed that love must be kept alive through persistent effort, like a fire needing constant kindling, and so she kept feeding it. Yet, instead of growing stronger, the flame weakened. He started responding less. His tone became indifferent, until finally, he said, "I need space." She was shattered. After everything I gave, she thought. But in truth, she had not given him the space to feel anything, not even her love. She had been present, but not powerful. Available, but not impactful. What she didn't understand was this: it is not how loud your love is that leaves a mark. It is how deeply your essence stays, even when you're not around. Letting a man feel your absence is not a strategy. It is an expression of self-respect. It is rooted in an unshakable understanding that your energy is not something to be begged for, but to be valued. When you stop chasing, you begin to rise. When you rise, others have the opportunity to notice the emptiness your presence used to fill. Neuroscience offers an explanation. The brain is wired to notice contrast. When something changes, a light turns off, a sound fades, a touch is no longer felt, the brain becomes more alert. Dopamine, the neurotransmitter of desire and pursuit, is activated more in anticipation than in reception. That means the moment someone becomes slightly out of reach, the brain begins to crave. It is the lack that creates longing. But let us be clear, this is not about playing games. Emotional maturity requires that we distinguish between healthy space and manipulative distance. To withdraw in silence as a punishment is not wisdom. It is emotional immaturity. But to return to your center, to reconnect with your path, and to allow someone the grace to miss you, that is strength rooted in self-mastery. There is an ancient proverb that says, "A flower does not chase the bee, it simply blooms and the bee comes." In this, there is profound wisdom. When you bloom, not for someone, but from within, you become irresistible. Your presence becomes a memory, not just a moment. You become the kind of person that someone remembers in stillness, not just in noise. A woman once shared her story. After years of emotionally overextending in every relationship, she made a vow to change. Instead of chasing, she started choosing herself. She pursued her passions, deepened her spiritual practices, cultivated friendships, traveled solo. Her energy shifted. She no longer felt desperate for attention. She became content in her own light. It was then that someone from her past reappeared, saying, "I miss you. I didn't realize how much your presence brought calm to my life." What had changed? Not him, not the situation. She had changed. Her absence had spoken where her words never could. Her emotional energy had recalibrated, and the resonance of her peace had echoed back to those who once overlooked her. This is the power of quiet transformation. You do not need to shout your worth. You only need to embody it. When your absence carries as much presence as your words once did, you have entered a state of true self-mastery. You are no longer dependent on validation. You become the source of energy, not the seeker of it. Relationships are not held together by force. They are sustained through resonance. And resonance happens when there is depth, not just proximity. Some people sit next to each other for years and never truly miss each other. Others spend a few days apart and feel it in their bones. What makes the difference is not the amount of time spent together, but the energy exchanged when present. A man will not miss a woman who is always trying to prove her love. He will miss the woman who held space for him without losing herself. He will miss the woman whose silence felt like wisdom, not punishment. He will miss the woman who inspired him to rise, not chase. There is beauty in quietness, in letting go of the need to be constantly seen, in allowing your absence to awaken gratitude in someone's heart. If he does not miss you, it tells you something important. It tells you not that you were not enough, but that your presence was not yet deeply recognized. And that recognition begins with you. When you miss someone, it is often not just them you miss. It is how you felt around them. Likewise, when someone misses you, they miss how your presence made them feel. So the question is not just, will he miss me? But rather, what part of himself does he touch when I am near? If your presence made him feel more centered, more alive, more inspired, your absence will not go unnoticed. But if your presence made him feel overwhelmed, suffocated, or pressured, then no amount of chasing can create longing. A woman once told a story about her grandmother. She said, "My grandfather never forgot her scent. Even long after she passed, he'd sometimes pause, close his eyes, and say, 'She's here.' What she left behind was not perfume. It was presence, an essence so deeply woven into his soul that even her absence felt full. That is the kind of woman one never forgets. Not because she was loud, not because she demanded, but because her stillness taught him something about life, about love, and about himself. Letting him feel your absence is an invitation. It is an open doorway through which reflection can enter. It is the pause that allows him to hear his own heart. In the silence of your stepping back, he may finally recognize the fullness of your offering. But whether he does or not, you have already won, because you have reclaimed your time, your energy, and your peace. There is an elegance in retreat, not in running away, but in returning home, to yourself, to your breath, to your calm, to your sacred pace. In this world of noise, a quiet woman who knows her worth speaks the loudest. And when she chooses to walk away, not in anger, but in stillness, her absence resounds louder than 1,000 words. Let no one mistake your peace for passivity. Let no one confuse your silence for surrender. When you no longer chase, you send a clear message. I am not here to beg for space in your life. I am here to be chosen fully and freely. And if you are not, then your path continues, unshaken, undisturbed, unbound. And so, if you want a man to miss you, become the kind of woman who leaves behind more than memories. Leave behind transformation. Become the mirror that reflects him back to himself, not through effort, but through essence. And then walk, not away, but inward, toward your truth, toward your wholeness, toward a life where your absence, like your presence, is a gift. When we seek to make someone miss us, we often begin with strategies aimed outward. We wonder how to shift their attention, how to pull at their heartstrings, how to craft our image so that it lingers in their thoughts. But the deepest truth is this: longing is not born from absence alone. It is born from presence, our presence, the depth of our energy, the sincerity of our emotions, the stillness of our being. These leave the true imprint. A person does not miss noise. They miss what was quiet yet unforgettable. They miss the way you looked at them without trying to possess them. They miss the conversations where they felt seen, not judged. They miss the ease with which you allowed them to be, even as you fully stood in who you are. Real connection is not built on attachment or pressure. It is cultivated through clarity, consistency, and emotional elegance. It is not the loudness of your presence, but the purity of your absence that makes someone reflect. When you are grounded in self-awareness, when you do not chase but radiate, when you give without losing your center, your energy becomes unforgettable. And in that space, you are no longer just a memory. You become a moment they cannot replace. Let them miss the peace you carried, the silence that healed them, the joy that required no performance. Let them miss the woman who didn't just need love, but embodied it. And as they begin to feel that space where your essence once stood, they will realize some people do not leave footprints, they leave echoes, and echoes always return. If this message touched you, subscribe to Self-Mastery and join a community grounded in growth and wisdom. Leave a comment below. Your story might inspire someone else on their journey.